In 1890, when Mitsubishi first claimed the barren rock called Hashima, it was little more than a black scar in the East China Sea, 15 kilometers from Nagasaki. Coal had been discovered decades earlier, but now the company saw potential. Endless seams beneath the seabed to fuel Japan's roaring Meiji-era factories and warships. They built high seawalls that turned the tiny island into a fortress, resembling a battleship, hence the name. Gunkanjima, that locals soon whispered with a mix of pride and dread. Reinforced concrete apartments rose like armored plating against the typhoons. By the early 20th century, the first towering blocks stood defiant, 9 stories high. The strongest structures Japan had ever planted on such a hostile patch of sea. Young miner Hiroshi Tanaka arrived in 1938. A fresh-faced Japanese from Kyushu drawn by steady wages. The island buzzed even then. Shafts plunged deep under the ocean floor. Elevators rattled down narrow throats into humid darkness where men swung picks by lantern light. The air tasted of salt and coal dust. At the surface, families filled the concrete hives, children racing along narrow alleys barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. Women hanging laundry on rooftops that overlooked nothing but endless waves. Schools, a hospital, a cinema. Shops, everything a small city needed was crammed onto 6 hectares. "We live like sardines in a can," Hiroshi joked to his new wife, Eiko, as they squeezed into a tiny apartment with a view of the seawall. But there was pride too. This was progress. Japan was rising, and Hashima was its beating heart of coal. Then came the war. By 1943, most able-bodied Japanese men had been drafted, leaving the mines starved for labor. The imperial authorities mobilized workers from occupied Korea and brought Chinese prisoners of war. Among them was Choi Min-jun, a 15-year-old Korean boy seized from his village and shipped across the sea like cargo. He arrived in a thin uniform that felt like a rice sack, eyes wide at the concrete monoliths rising from the waves. Jail Island. The older Korean workers called it in hushed tones. Hell Island. Min-jun was assigned to the deep shafts. They worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes double, often wearing only underwear because the heat and coal dust shredded clothes. The tunnels were so narrow men crawled on their bellies, gas pooling in pockets that could ignite with a spark. Ceilings groaned with the weight of the sea above. Accidents claimed lives weakly crushed by falls, drowned in flooded sections, poisoned by bad air. Food was meager. Rice mixed with bean dregs and dried sweet potatoes. Beatings came for slowing down. At night, in the segregated dormitories, Min-jun heard men whisper of escape. Some tried swimming toward the distant lights of Nagasaki, clutching planks. Most were swept away by currents or caught and punished. Records would later speak of hundreds who never left the island deaths from exhaustion, malnutrition, or the merciless work. Japanese supervisors sometimes looked away, sometimes joined the cruelty. Hiroshi, now a shift leader, felt the weight of it, but told himself it was war. Everyone suffered. Yet even in darkness, flickers of humanity persisted. Children, Japanese, Korean, a few Chinese played together in the narrow streets during rare free hours. They roasted chestnuts smuggled from the mainland and laughed at the same games. Min-jun, when not underground, sometimes watched them and remembered his own lost siblings. Eiko taught basic Japanese to a few Korean wives in secret, sharing precious sugar when rations allowed. Festivals brought brief color, drumming, colorful dresses, chants that echoed of the concrete walls. But the sea always roared back, reminding them they were trapped on a floating prison. The war ended in 1945 with fire from the sky over Nagasaki. The atomic cloud rose visible from Hashima's rooftops. Japanese guards quietly evacuated some supervisors first, fearing revenge. Many Korean and Chinese workers stayed on, some choosing to remain as conditions slowly improved in the post-war years. The island rebuilt. New families arrived. By 1959, Hashima reached its astonishing peak, 5,259 souls packed onto that speck of reclaimed land, making it one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Over 80,000 people per square kilometer in the residential zones. Life felt almost normal again. Schools rang with children's voices. The cinema showed movies. Families celebrated births and marriages in the shadow of the mine's winding towers. Hiroshi and Eiko raised 2 daughters there, proud of the paradise they had helped build, even as the concrete cracked under constant salt spray and typhoons. But coal's reign was ending. Petroleum flowed cheaply from overseas. Mines across Japan shuttered one by one. On Hashima, the seams grew harder to reach, more dangerous. Production slowed. Families began leaving in the 1960s, chasing jobs on the mainland. The population dwindled. In January 1974, Mitsubishi held a solemn ceremony in the island gymnasium and announced the mine's permanent closure. The exodus was swift and orderly. By April 20th, the last resident, a man carrying an umbrella against light rain, boarded the final ferry to Nagasaki. He glanced back once at the silent apartment blocks, then turned away. Left behind were the ghosts of everyday life. Half-eaten meals on tables, children's toys scattered in hallways, calendars frozen on 1974, faded photos of smiling families against the seawall, stray cats that couldn't be caught prowled the ruins. Nature wasted no time. Typhoons battered the concrete, sawed it into steel. Vines crept through broken windows. Rooftops collapsed inward. The battleship began to sink, not into the sea, but into decay. Decades later, a young tour guide named Sora stands on a permitted section of the southern landing point, speaking to visitors from around the world. The rest of the island remains off limits to dangerous, with floors ready to give way and asbestos lingering like old curses. From the boat, Gunkanjima still looks like a warship adrift, its concrete cliffs jagged and overgrown. Sora tells the story carefully. The triumph of industrialization, the innovation of those first high-rise apartments built to defy the sea, the UNESCO recognition in 2015 as part of Japan's Meiji Industrial Revolution sites. She mentions the harsh labor of the wartime years, to the conscripted Koreans and Chinese who toiled under brutal conditions, because the full truth belongs to these ruins. Sometimes, when the wind howls through the empty corridors, visitors swear they hear faint echoes, the clang of picks deep underground, children's laughter bouncing off walls, a mother's call for dinner, the low chant of a Korean folk song. Hikers on permitted paths feel watched by the hollow windows. Old miners' descendants return occasionally, pointing to where their apartment once stood, now a skeletal frame open to the sky. Hashima never truly sank. It simply waits, a concrete battleship frozen in time, carrying the weight of ambition, suffering, community, and loss. The sea pounds relentlessly against its walls, as if trying to wash the island clean. But the stories remain etched in the crumbling plaster, of men who crawled through darkness for empire and survival, of families who built a miniature world against the waves, and of a sudden silence that fell one rainy April day in 1974. In the end, Gunkanjima teaches a quiet lesson. Empires rise on coal and concrete, but they leave behind only echoes and the stubborn beauty of ruins reclaimed by wind, salt, and time.